Every office has one. The highly productive employee who relentlessly clears their inbox, hits their targets, and moves with total confidence, completely ignoring the stressed, frustrated wake they leave behind them. We usually hear managers talk about these individuals with a highly specific phrase. They are great at their job, but they cause a lot of problems for everyone else. If you pause and listen to that statement, it is completely illogical. It is impossible to actually be great at a job while simultaneously making the broader organization suffer. When leaders get frustrated by this and demand more accountability, they almost always look in the wrong direction. They start policing the lazy employees or the obvious slackers. They completely miss that the most destructive forces in an office are often the highly conscientious, incredibly hardworking overachievers. The confusion comes from how we document work. A real job actually has two distinct halves. The left side is your list of assigned tasks, the technical duties you were hired to perform. But there is a second, invisible requirement on the right, the actual human impact those tasks have on the people around you. We have built a corporate culture that entirely ignores that right half. Because we falsely equate accountability with simply checking off a to-do list, these toxic overachievers are allowed to tear teams apart while looking completely untouchable on paper. To see how devastating this blind spot can be, consider a young man hired to work in the business office of a nursing home. Alongside his administrative duties, management gave him one specific daily task: have a personal interaction with every single patient in the facility. One of those patients was a woman named Linda. She was entirely nonverbal, confined to a hospital bed with severely contracted limbs. Every single day, the young man would walk into her room, introduce himself, and try to engage her in conversation. Every single day, she simply stared back at him in silence. In his own mind, this young man was the absolute model of accountability. He hated this part of his day, but he pushed through it anyway, executing his assigned checklist flawlessly and interacting with Linda for weeks on end. Then, nearly a month into this routine, he noticed a piece of trash jammed behind Linda's open closet door. He picked it up to throw it away, only to be stopped by a nurse in the hallway. He opened it up. It was a communication board, covered in simple pictures. Linda couldn't speak, but she could point. He had perfectly accomplished his assigned task of talking to her, but he had entirely failed his job. He was so intensely focused on his own compliance that he remained entirely blind to the actual human being sitting right in front of him. If human impact is this obvious when we actually look for it, why do high performers go blind to it in the first place? The answer is a psychological mechanism called self-deception. We can trace exactly how this happens. It always starts with a micro moment of intuition. You come across a piece of information, and you instinctively sense that a colleague could really use it. But instead of sharing it, you hesitate. You actively choose to ignore that impulse, withholding your help. The human brain cannot easily handle the guilt of betraying its own helpful instincts. To resolve that psychological friction, your brain instantly manufactures a lie to justify your inaction, sending you down one of two paths. The first path is the superiority lie. You rationalize your selfishness by deciding that your colleague is simply lazy. You frame this refusal to help as a virtue, a necessary lesson in self-reliance for a peer you've deemed incompetent. The second path is the inferiority lie. Instead of arrogance, you wallow in self-blame. You tell yourself that your colleague is much smarter than you anyway, and that by offering help, you would only mess up their workflow and expose your own incompetence. These two reactions look like polar opposites on the surface, but they achieve the exact same psychological goal. They provide an airtight, seemingly logical excuse to avoid taking responsibility for anyone but yourself. Self-deception weaponizes our own egos. It traps us in a closed loop where we constantly protect our own self-image, entirely at the expense of our colleagues' success. Back in the modern corporate office, you cannot cure self-deception by enforcing stricter KPIs or adding more bullet points to a job description. You also cannot fix it by encouraging employees to fall on their swords. Extreme self-blame, the person who constantly says, "I ruined everything and I'm terrible at this," is just another flavor of unhelpful, ego-driven self-centeredness. True accountability is a collaborative, egoless focus on repairing damage. It is the simple, direct act of saying, "I broke this, How do we fix it together? To get teams there, leaders must force employees to map their invisible impact. This requires sending them to their colleagues with 3 very precise questions. How do my actions affect your ability to do your work? How can I be most helpful to you? And how do you want me to check in with you on my impact? These questions act as a direct countermeasure to self-deception. They strip away the internal lies by forcing the worker to sit face-to-face with their colleagues and recognize them as real human beings with valid, pressing objectives. Real accountability is the continuous, honest measurement of how well your daily actions enable the people around you to succeed.